Hi, in this video of Inkpot, we now start with Unit 1 of your Indian Economy Semester 5. I just want to point a few things beforehand, this being the first video for Indian Economy paper. So, see, Indian Economy is designed in 4 units and each unit will be having a particular list of readings. Our focus should be not just to understand the core crux and all the points which the author says in each readings, as well as at times research what are the ideas being said in the paper beyond the paper at your level, but the main focus has to be the probable list of questions, because usually what happens, a question asks on the entire reading as such, or a specific statement is quoted from the reading, but basically what the answer expects you is to give the entire gist of that reading. So the questions should also be in your mind while reading a particular paper. So this video we start with one of the core readings in the Unit 1, Balakrishnan's paper about economic growth in the Nehru era. Okay, so Nehru era is essentially, so Nehru era essentially refers to this particular time period, 1952 to 1964. Author is trying to investigate the growth pattern during this period. Now, as a background, we should know that this era was faced by a lot of critics because of the model or the kind of approach and strategy for growth it had. See, usually there were some specific types of growth models being followed, like the idea of self-reliance, okay, then import substitution strategies, okay, and two particular models which the author also discusses, Nehru-Mahalanobis model and Vakil-Brahmananda plan. So essentially author has been trying to suggest that there was a divided view in this particular Nehru era. There was a divided view of a wasted past, that this era was nothing much but it ruined India as such, and the second view or a debatable view is that it was in fact the watershed era for growth. Okay, now it's the second view which Balakrishnan tries to counter argue, that it was not true that 1952 to 64 was a wasted period or a lag period or India suffered during that time, but due to specific reasons like growth transition happening, high state directedness, and we shall subsequently discuss what other points were responsible for Indian economy to really prosper in this Nehru era period. Okay, so we begin with the first core model discussed in this particular paper, Nehru-Mahalanobis model. Of course, as the name suggests, model was given by Jawaharlal Nehru ji and P.C. Mahalanobis. So what are the salient points? The first point, it's a two-sector model. From two sectors, the first sector being consumer goods. We can denote consumer goods by C, and second, capital goods by K. So essentially, total output or the economy as such was defined as the sum of capital and consumer goods. Okay. Then second point, capital was not subject to diminishing marginal returns. Now this is quite a departing point from what actually capital is assumed. What does this mean? It essentially means that if you have an increase of capital, it does not diminish as such, but it keeps on increasing your output, your productive base. Okay, so it was assumed to be endless, which is quite a limited assumption or a point. Then, third point, a third assumption was about closed economy. So there was no foreign aid or no assistance as such to be taken for India's growth. So now, what was the objective of this particular model? Objective was that if there is a high emphasis on industrialization, basically high focus on improving the industrial sector's growth, it will lead to increasing the income levels of the people, of the economy, which will eventually lead to eliminating poverty. So moving from a macroeconomic perspective to your poverty or socio-developmental perspective. This was the main idea of this model. Another main thing which we cannot forget about this model is the emphasis. So it emphasized on heavy goods sector. Now what is heavy goods? Essentially, heavy goods is, if you go by the definition, it's the machine building complexes, those raw materials which aid in the production of final goods like steel, chemical, electricity, transport sectors, you know. So essentially, it's nothing but capital only, okay? It's capital only, but a part of capital goods, not the whole capital good, because it was characterized by, say, large gestation periods, and hence state only could afford to build these particular goods. Okay, so it was believed in this model that if you are investing in capital, essentially you are fueling both consumer and capital goods. So consumer goods can go for only consumer, but capital goods can aid both consumer and capital goods. That was the idea. So you have allocation also more for capital than consumer goods, and basically the core idea remained the same, that if you're having more capital, you are essentially increasing the productive base of the economy. Another important thing about this model throughout, like the background, was that public sector is very important. It will be investments by the state, by the government, which will aid in industrial growth, income level, and eliminating poverty, as we discussed earlier. So now, what were the criticisms, major criticisms of this model? First one was that it was seen as a supply side model. Basically, it ignored the, so what does this mean? It ignored the demand side constraints. Okay, now Balakrishnan counter argues this, that it was not so true. It is mentioned in the paper also how he says that in the basic framing of this model, demand side constraints were discussed, but if we see the overall results and entire emphasis of this model, it's seen that it was essentially a supply side model. Then low discount rates were seen. Basically, people preferred to have short run gains only and not go for, not seek for long term. People had less patience level. Otherwise, and this was like a contradiction to the framing of this model, which suggested that long run growth is being sought at the cost of short term gains. Then there was no attention to savings constraint. There was no mention of taxation. Well, there are other criticisms also to this particular model, say the limit as such only, the limit about the foreign aid being zero, okay, or interaction being zero. So if there is no interaction, how will we have a limited perception, right? There was no opening up of the economy. Then second, this model was also said to believe only catering to smaller countries. Okay, then author presents another plan, or say another model, which had come to answer the criticisms of Nehru Mahalanobis model. So there are several historians, okay, And the paper also makes an attempt, like Desai is an author who says that there was no mention of unemployment, inflation in Nehru Mahalanobis model. So what Vakil Brahmanand plan focuses is on wage goods sector. Now, what is wage goods? Wage goods is essentially uh, comprising of food, clothing, and the basic necessities, as compared to the heavy goods sector, which was all about capital. So this is about consumer goods, primary goods, all of the basic necessities. Okay, so the another factor or the another characteristic of this plan was that it believed that if there is lack of wage goods, there will be unemployment in India. So we need to be very much sufficient or have surplus of wage goods in order to get rid of unemployment. It believed in the process of multiplier process. Okay, so multiplier process suggests that if you are focusing from the basic, which is agriculture, to then industry, to then further, basically it keeps on multiplying to give maximum growth. Okay, and so the stress was on the need of agricultural development in India. So a ready question becomes for this reading that if you compare the two models which is put forth by this author, it's Nehru Mahalanobis model versus Vakil Brahmananda model. Now Nehru Mahalanobis model, okay, one thing I just remember, you should also know the other names of each model. Like Nehru Mahalanobis model is also called the, it's also called the second 5-year plan model. Okay, and you should also know that Nehru Mahalanobis model was claimed to be inspired by Feldman's model. Now, Feldman's model was for Soviet Union, but Mahalanobis said that, well, he was not aware. They usually claim so, then they make their own model. But yeah, so it was inspired. So in exam you can get a question that explain the characteristics of the model inspired by Feldman or inspired by Soviet Union, or explain the characteristic of that model which was second 5-year plan model. So you should not get confused which model is this. It's basically the Nehru Mahalanobis model only. Okay, and yeah, so coming back to the differences between the two, you can see we've discussed all these points. Nehru Mahalanobis had focused on heavy goods, Vakil Brahmananda on wage goods. Nehru Mahalanobis had a supply side approach, Vakil Brahmananda had a demand side, or to say the primary necessities approach. Nehru Mahalanobis laid stress on industrial development first, whereas Vakil Brahmananda laid stress on agricultural development. Okay, now the core element becomes, what does the author suggest on these two models? Well, if you read the entire reading, especially there are some speeches also given in your reading, author suggests that, see, NM model or the Nehru Mahalanobis model is better in terms of theoretically laying out clearly everything and having less of weaknesses, plus going by what the ideology was in that particular era. Overall though, both these models had this big limit that external sector could not be utilized, or there was no opening up of economy at the time. Then lack of engine of growth is the real cause. So how do you propel growth? How should the capacity be built? Was capacity building basically was a major issue, whether we focus on agriculture first or industry first. Okay, so Balakrishnan tries to portray and suggest that basic issue was something else. It was the engine of growth, lack. And lastly, both in agriculture and industry, they are interdependent. They are essential. So you need agricultural Agriculture's growth for industrial prospering, and industry's growth for agriculture. Here I would like to suggest you that what happens at times they give you questions from a particular speech, because this paper has a lot of speech and suggested by prominent historians and scholars, one being Raj Krishna. So what does Raj Krishna say? Raj Krishna suggests, there's a statement by him that even 4% growth of rate in agriculture is not promised without right growth in industries. So basically 4% growth in agriculture can't happen, okay, by industry to be zero, okay, and even a 7% growth in industry can't happen by your complete neglect of agriculture. Okay, so see, these statements come and they ask you to first portray what Raj Krishna believes and then lay stress on what the reading has given as such. So you should know how to present the statement by the author, like you should have be knowing where he mentions this line and in what context. So this line is mentioned in context of interdependence and essential importance of both agriculture and industry, which even Balakrishnan believes. So the next topic or the next main emphasis of this entire paper is about the misperceptions and neglects during this era, the Nehru era, or the period which we said 1952 to 1964. Okay, the first one, neglect of agriculture. Now, even Mahalanobis and Nehru basically had this mind that how agriculture is important, but their model could not stress as such per se on this. At policy level, there was neglect. At resource level, there was insufficient allocation as claimed. But Balakrishnan tries to point it out that, see, agriculture was not neglected completely. Its growth rate could be higher. Now, how does he say this? Now, he says this because there was 22.7% investment in agriculture, okay, in the 3-5-year plans. And then he gives evidence like there was guaranteed MSPs, or the minimum support price, then there were subsidies. Okay, so basically, see, you don't have to remember very much finer details. You need to know that, like this point, if we are saying about what author suggests, so we should know what is what is author trying to bring out, okay, like what is author trying to believe in. Then the second neglect, or the second point or pointed out was role of public sector enterprises. Now, public sector was seen a heavy responsibility because of investments, because of promoting the growth, and also there was no reliance on foreign aid, versus private sector. Okay, private sector was not much in prominence and awareness kind of situation. Author suggests that people, as they claim that it's only public sector being highlighted in all the time, and private sector did not come in forward. That's not true, because public sector had a very big role in churning the growth process in Nehru era. Now again he gives value points. Okay, now he gives value points like fund base could only increase because of public sector. Then mobilization of resources. Okay, this was also possible only because of public sector. So again he tries to point that a balanced view, perhaps, that public sector was not a black hole. Okay, it had its own role. Then the third neglect was about primary education being neglected. Okay, so primary education neglect was one of the major things this era lacked. Now, in this particular point, author also does not portray that, well, we did have some growth in education. Okay, author also says that, well, there's a lot of irony that how there's one particular instance pointed out, and you may remember this, that how we celebrate 14th November as we celebrate 14th November as Nehruji's birthday, right? But this era did not see children's or primary education prospering so well. So, these kind of examples, if there's complete question or specific question on education for this paper, you can give some examples. It tells the examiner that you have read the paper thoroughly, you've enjoyed reading the paper thoroughly. So, just a instance about that. So, yeah. Neglect on primary education was because funds were allocated less and importance from the result or outcome as such was seen less for education. Okay, so here the author also suggests the same as the neglect was. Now, lastly, coming to the final conclusions about this paper, the first one, Nehru era, a mix of positives and negatives. We can't say it was just negative. We also can't say it was just positive. Now, positive because Indian economy became more competitive. Now, this is because, see, income levels for sure increased, okay? Income levels definitely saw an increase. Then you also have industry doing really well as compared to the colonial period, okay? So, relatively word is important. Industry is relatively doing well, okay? So you had that kind of situation, and that interlinking, how we discussed that in the end, interlinking could be stressed in this era, interlinking between agriculture and industry sector. But now, how is this era being portrayed or being seen as negative? First, there was high state role and government intervention. Now, see, a ready question can come from this reading, that what kind of role did state planning and government play in shaping the growth of country? What kind of role? So, these kind of error are seen and evaluated whether Nehru era was good or bad in terms of growth with state role. Okay. Second negative being there was complete closedness to foreign capital, right? Technological backwardness in production, productivity, hence see, productivity suffered, okay? If you don't have openness, you don't have access to foreign ideas, foreign capital, foreign technology, and hence your productivity remains as could be done by only conventional sources. Then there was lack of competition and poor quality of consumer goods. Unaccountable public sector, corruption was also there. Second conclusion, very important, is about Nehruvian socialism. Now this term, essentially, it's also called as Nehruism, okay? So author does not discuss this exactly under your conclusion, but he suggests it throughout, that how Nehruism or Nehruvian socialism was all about increasing income, industry, more than agriculture, while this might lead to poverty, reduction, education, but with all the flaws and what all we discussed and various other features, okay, like license Raj came up that time, planning commission came up. So you don't need to deal in so much detail, but you should be aware about this terminology. Lastly, education, primary education, ironically suffered in much in Nehru era. Well, this we discussed in detail, isn't it? So these are the main conclusions of this paper, of this important paper in unit 1. Hope you like this video and you could find some major inputs for your exam, for your reading, for your experience. Thank you so much.